Welcome to Manhwa Recaps, spoilers ahead, watch out, and take care. The manhwa starts with a guy live streaming, saying that this is all for real. The chat is going crazy saying it's like a movie. And the man turns his camera and points toward a giant monster. The chatters are asking if it's real, since it's not even on the news. A man drops his phone and runs over to his balcony. His face is both scared yet curious. As he looks up, we see a figure in his eye. As there is a giant ominous form clasping its hands together, as if it were praying. The man falls backwards saying if he were to explain how it got to this point, he would have to take us back to the beginning. It was 3 years ago just as he started high school. He's walking down the hallway, to his classroom, which is class 3 of the first years. As soon as he enters we see someone asleep, while the rest all turn to look at him. But quickly turn back to the front after seeing who it was. The man says the atmosphere is awkward as hell, and he wonders if he should sit in the corner. He picks a seat, and sighs saying this is overwhelming. But as overwhelmed as he felt, he bet there were a lot of mixed emotions in the classroom. Some might have been nervous about the unfamiliar environment, while others just had zero care in the world. Others would be investing in their future, some would be watching Manhwa recaps on YouTube. Others are still late, but none of them would be as confused. We see a window appear in front of the man, he rubs his eye and does a double take. But it's still there. The window welcomes him to the school, and says he needs to give the ghost's hands to get special abilities, also there's a demon king apparently. The man wonders if he's been playing too many games. An announcement comes over the intercom, saying there's a blackout on campus so the electricity is limited. Due to this, the entrance ceremony will be taking place in the courtyard. Some of the students in his class stand up saying that's a pain in the ass. But none of them seem to notice the window in front of him, and he wonders if nobody else can see it. As they all start walking down the hallway, he says that it's definitely a status window. He says that there was a study done that shows 80% of men see status windows. But of course he just made that shit up. He starts to nervously scratch the back of his neck. And says he's gone crazy on his first day of school. He makes his way to the courtyard and looks at it saying it still isn't disappearing. But he wonders what the hell it's even talking about. Mentioning mysteries, urban legends and even ghost stories. He doesn't even like those things. He sees there's an option for a second page, and stretches his hand out to the window. But someone yells at him which startles him, and tells him to line up properly. He decides that he should focus on the ceremony first, and wonders if he can get rid of the window, and just like that it disappears. The principal or headmaster gets up on the mic and starts freestyling for them, but doesn't hit his mark. He gets mid-sentence and his head starts to rapidly swell up. Until he pops like a zit, the students are speechless. Even one of the professors say nothing, as the principal's think tank juice is splattered onto the ceiling, and on the floor. The main character just sits there confused, and asks what the hell just happened to that guy. One of the teachers go up to check on him, and peers over the railing completely mortified to see that the principal is missing his head. She starts yelling for someone to call 911, but as she goes to dial it, she slowly starts to forget the number and her head along with some others begin to swell up. And they pop like zits too. The students scream and start running saying they need to get out of here. A teacher tries to calm them down, saying they need to wait, but he begins to swell up and a lot of the other students also just have their heads exploded. The main character sees all of this happening just right behind him, and starts to run saying he doesn't want to be next. He starts to think about where to go. Some of the other students make it to the front gate, but realize that it is an opening. The man sees the others aren't able to get out, and with the others behind him having their heads exploding, he thinks about going over the wall. But sees other students pulling each other down in pure panic. He says the front gate and walls are too crowded, and he won't be able to get out if he gets stuck in their mass hysteria. So he starts to think of another way out. We see a side door open up, and the security guard comes out asking what's going on. He sees everyone running for their lives, and the mob trying to climb the school wall. And he yells telling them it's too dangerous. Some nearby students run up to him asking for him to open the damn gate. He asks if they are crazy. And out of fear they turn aggressive asking him to open the gate, and start mobbing him. The main character, who still has no name, asks why he's so intent on keeping it closed, even when he can see something is wrong. But, thanks to the students getting distracted, there's more room on the wall now. With the exploders getting closer and closer, he realizes he doesn't want to win the Darwin Award and starts running. He makes his way to the wall, and leaps up grabbing onto the railing. A student grabs his leg saying not to leave him behind, and he kicks him saying get the hell away. He cuts his hand on the pointy part of the railing, and jumps over the wall. He says Fate's will is like a ghost, it shows up unannounced, disrupting daily life, and that he didn't know then. That he was already infected. His vision begins to grow darker as his head inevitably pops. A window appears, saying he died, and will restart at a previous checkpoint, then starts to load him in. He wakes up screaming, inside of the classroom, and yells about his head. But looks down to see the window appearing again, welcoming him. The other students look over, wondering what flavor of mental illness he has. They start to think that he's trolling or something, and laugh, saying he is an interesting one for day one. But the man is just confused, as he is back in the classroom, with the same students as before. He wonders if he was dreaming or something. But says it felt too real to have been a dream. He starts to feel sick to his stomach thinking about it. And wonders if he really went back in time. He says that dying once and returning to the past, and just the whole situation seems so game-like. The intercom cuts on again, and repeats the announcement of the blackout, and again tells them all to return to the courtyard. He starts to clench his head, saying that this shit is definitely real. And thinks about how to change the outcome. He says the secret must lie in the status window. Thankfully it starts to narrate for us. Unfortunately bro caught astray from it, but it says that it's his first day of the next 3 years in school. For anyone else they'd be excited, but for him that isn't the case. Since he realized that this school is definitely not ordinary. And he has an ominous feeling that there will be more bizarre things to happen, but it's the first day of a long 3 years ahead of him. He sees the window mentioning a tutorial, saying to make 3 friends and start a club, and he'll be given 10 ghost story points. He says he thought it was very game-like. The difference is that the pain he felt from exploding definitely wasn't virtual. He wonders what he should do, saying their teacher forced them to the courtyard again. He wonders if it'll happen again, or if he's really just losing his mind. He starts to get too caught up in if it's real or not, and glances back at the wall he leapt over. Saying since he's at the back of the crowd, he can leave hella quick if it repeats. And that he will run at the first sight of danger. The principal starts his monologue, saying he's so happy to have them attending. But just like last time, his head explodes, while his blood flows through the air. The main character quickly turns and starts running, leaving the rest stunlocked while they wait for what's next. He says he needs to get through the gate somehow, before the others crowd it. He turns and sees them right on his ass, saying they are quick. He has an idea, and yells to get the security guard's attention. He comes out of his office asking what the yelling's about. The main character points at him, and yells, telling the rest he has the key and they need it to open the main gate. The security guard freezes up as the crowd begins to rush him, asking for the key. Now that his plan has worked, it's time to get a move on while they are distracted. Instead of climbing the wall, he opts to just climb over the gate. He lands on the other side. He doesn't stick the landing and says he can't think he's safe as he died here last time. He starts to run down the street, to get as far away as he can from the school. But he falls over and loses consciousness. He wakes up inside of the hospital, and when he opens his eyes he sees dudes in hazmat suits. They dubbed it, the Noksong High School 300-person head explosion incident. The government assumed it was an infectious disease and he was one of the few survivors. His parents burst into the room worried about him, and he seemed relieved to see them. They hug one another, and he says it took 10 days for him to be able to see them. After being pestered by the media and police for a long time, he returned to a normal life. But the status window is still there. He wonders what it really means, and now he is back inside of his room at home / just staring at it, and we finally hear his mother calling his name. She tells June that tomorrow is his graduation, so to sleep early. He sighs and goes to close the window. We learn it's been 3 years since the incident, and the window still haunts him to this day. He goes to cut his light off, and says he tried to avoid it. Since he made friends and joined clubs, but nothing happened. He thinks that it's truly just a hallucination. Just as the clock strikes midnight, the window says graduation day has arrived. And that the Demon King has been resurrected. He hears an emergency alert on his phone, which wakes up him. We see people all over the city looking up into the sky, and wonder what's going on. Now the start of the manhwa makes more sense, as the giant monster has appeared. Which of course, now we know is the Demon King. June says it's definitely near the school which was closed off, and he falls to the floor again, saying that the status window is real. At that moment he felt a chilling gaze, and says it felt like he was making eye contact with it. His body starts to shut down, as he starts to lose his sense of being and is left with nothing but pure psychosis, as he died in a way he couldn't comprehend. He obtains a bad ending due to turning a blind eye. The window says starting regression, and reloads his previous save. He jolts awake in his school uniform and looks down again to see the same familiar window, along with the intercom going off. While the students complain like usual, we see the one worrying about his future looking around the room, then returns to being an NPC. June starts to shake in fear, saying it started again. He thought he got over it, and that he became numb to the topic. But he still remembers it like it was yesterday. The door opens with his teacher asking why they aren't going outside. He says that she rushed them out last time too. She tells them to stand up, and to wake up the girl in the back of the room. One of the girls looks at her and gets too nervous, and the glasses boy also seems too afraid. June wonders why they aren't waking her up when the teacher asks them to. June turns around to see her, and sighs, saying okay. Then says that the other two are the herbivore types, and that the sleeping girl is closer to a carnivore. At least based on how they are dressed. He says they must be afraid, but he stands up saying he just got back from living 3 years, so to him being older mentally it feels like a ridiculous concern. But he decides to showcase what being mature is like, so reaches out to the girl and straight stutters for 5 minutes trying to form a sentence. The herbivores realize they sent one of their own kind to be slaughtered. The girl doesn't even acknowledge him, and June says he tried to pretend like he wasn't a girlfriendless loser, but he can't even talk to women. She starts to raise her head, and looks up glaring at June, who is intimidated by women. She scoots her chair back and gets up and walks out. June says he thought she was gonna hit him. Their homeroom teacher looks through the windows as they pass down the hallway, saying that the other classes have already gone outside. June starts to wonder about what to do. He says he remembers it from 3 years ago, and if it keeps going like this it'll be the same as always. So he needs to change something. He calls out to his teacher, and says it might be tough for him to stand in the courtyard since he's anemic. She says it doesn't look like he is anemic since he isn't that thin. He tells her that it's not related to weight. She thinks about it, and he can see that she doesn't seem uncertain. He tries to convince her by saying that if he collapses his parents would make a big deal about it. The teacher thinks about how that'd be an issue. She tells him that she'll take him to the infirmary. They head over to it, and after she leaves he peers his head down the hallway, and says she's finally gone. He closes the door saying he's already died twice, and that he doesn't want there to be a third. He says if things were structured like a game there'd be a clue in his classroom for sure, and that it wouldn't be too strange. He opens the door, and is surprised to see the herbivores from earlier. He asks what they are doing here. The girl awkwardly tries to explain it, and she says that when the teacher left the red jacket girl walked back to the room, so they followed her. June tells them they are more daring than he thought. The glasses kid clears his throat, and says that he's no different, then asks how his anemia is. June quickly tells him that it was a lie, and that aside they seem to be accomplices now. He says they should gather and talk about something. June thinks how it's better this way, and it'd be pointless to figure it out on his own, but if he talks he can find something out. He introduces himself to them as Lee June. We learn Glasses is named on Gyeongwon. The other herbivore is named Yoon Suna. June says bro's name is legit Glasses in Korean. We'll call him Jeon. He says they weren't leaving the class either, and asks why. Yuna says that she's smooth-brained. The window says that his understanding of Suna has increased by 5. June says it's yet another game system, and Jeon says he didn't leave after remembering a ghost story about the school announcement. June asks what it is. Jeon says it's a blackout, which is a pretty famous ghost story. June says the term ghost story is brought up in the window too. June asks him to tell more about the ghost story. Jeon says that one day there was a blackout at school during the evening class. The sudden darkness startled the student, but there was a broadcast that followed, which told them to go to the courtyard. While others walked out, the top student in the class stayed behind. Seeing this, the second-ranked students ask the top student why she wasn't leaving, and asks if she has to study even now to become a top student. The top student slowly answered, asking if they hadn't noticed, asking how they can broadcast during a blackout. June and Suna are confused, and ask if that's all there was to it. Jeon asks if he's heard it before. June says it sounds semi-familiar, asking if there's more to it. Jeon says there's a few variations, but that's how ghost stories actually are. For example, there's a story that they looked out to see a blood-filled courtyard. June quickly asks him if they survived, and Jeon replies saying it's safe to assume that, but says it's not a real story, so why is he so invested into it? June says that's true, but he stayed behind because he took the story seriously, right? Jeon says it did bother him a bit, and that they wouldn't be able to use the intercom during a blackout, so he thought he'd just sit in the classroom again. Then says maybe they were still able to do the broadcast due to the backup system. June says he seems excited, and he's the type of guy to show how smart he is. His understanding of him increases by 20. He opens the status window up again, and looks at it. And double checks that it mentions ghost stories, and he says that he needs to figure out the relation. Sana chimes in, saying that she thought it was an interesting story. He's surprised she spoke up, and he says she mentioned she was a bit slow, but didn't expect it to be so extreme. And then he realizes that it must have looked like he was staring at her. He apologizes, and then the principal starts to talk. A cold chill runs down June's spine, as the principal slowly gets to the point where his head explodes. June closes his eyes in anticipation, but the principal continues the speech like normal. June is caught off guard. June realizes that he's survived, and a window appears saying that he's come across the broadcast ghost story, and earned 5 GS points. June stretches over the desk and sighs loudly purely out of relief. Jian jumps a bit, and asks what's wrong and if something happened to him. June just laughs at it, and says he wouldn't believe him even if he told him. For some reason it clears the tutorial, or maybe I'm misunderstanding the windows. But he earns 10 GS, and unlocks a status window. The entrance ceremony is finally coming to an end, and he looks at his status window to show his disposition and his quirk, along with an inventory slot I think. June is surprised by all of the info. And says it's really feeling like a game with stats and stuff. He taps on his disposition to read more. It tells us a whole lot of info that I ain't reading, feel free to if you want to. But he summarizes it, saying that he's inconsistent and whimsical depending on the situation. He realizes he's a complete wuss. It says he has an iffy personality, and the only positive thing about him is his ability to think his way out of situations. He wonders why he caught a stray, and says that it's honestly an annoyingly understandable explanation. He's been the type of person to get more than halfway through things, but never see it through to the end. And he wonders if it's from the disposition. He says it's like the window knew more about him than he did himself. And he wonders if he can use it on others too. He looks at Jian and opens his status window. And it opens up his window, but has some of it as question marks. He's a bit of a wiki warrior. June says he's just as he thought he was. He wonders about Sana, and opens her thing, but sees that it's all question marked, and that she acts slow. He sees that she is only 16 and decides to try asking her about it next time. He received way less info on her, and says it must be due to the understanding level being too low. He wonders about the delinquent girl, and opens it. We learn her name is Lee Jinhee, and she also has no information. He has an understanding of 0. He says he didn't expect much to be here, but it's quite odd how it knew info about him he didn't even know, and that it knows everyone's names and ages. When he's never asked for some of it, and that the status window can see way beyond his perception. He closes his eyes, and starts to recap how for some reason unknown ghost stories are happening in real life. There's a game-like system only he can see, and just like in a game if he dies he can respawn. He's not sure what the purpose is for the GS points either. It said he cleared the quest to make 3 friends as well. The 2 of them should be Jian and Sana, but maybe Jinhee counted too. He wonders why she's counted, saying that is absurd. And he thinks about how when a delinquent says the word friend it's usually always dangerous, so he should look out for it. We are then introduced to his teacher Damim, who tells them all to read through the handouts carefully. He wonders why his teacher's name is just teacher in Korean. He glances at the paper and says most of it is just common sense. But his head hurts so he really doesn't want to read anything. But some of the students who are reading it are a bit concerned about what it says. An announcement comes over from the broadcast. They received that they were printed incorrectly. And they'll be coming back to retrieve the handouts. His teacher out of breath comes back into the room. Saying there's a mistake in the handouts, he tells them all that the students in the back should collect them all and hand them to him. June looks back at them wondering if there's something odd about them. Someone quickly takes it back before he can read it. June says that was hella fast, but says it's whatever since he can just ask Jian or Sana about it. Jian tells him that he didn't bother reading it. June is speechless about this. But Sana chirps up saying that she actually read the handouts. June asks her what the mistake was. She says that it was worded correctly, it just had something odd. June and Jian ask what it is. Sana said she couldn't read it all, but between the normal policies it mentioned being careful of a certain woman. And it said that she is the laughing woman, and to avoid her. June wonders what it means, and she says that it detailed how to be careful of her. But Sana doesn't remember the details. June says that's weird, and thinks it's a prank. He's a bit slow too. Jian says that it used a popular ghost story. June at this point recognizes that this isn't a coincidence. So he asks Jian what the story is. Jian says it's going viral online, and that it'd be faster to just show him. Jian says he'll make a group chat since they exchanged numbers earlier, and to look at the photo he is sending. June's phone vibrates, and he sends him some contract that explains how the apartment was built exclusively for its employees. It mentions how if anyone in your family is religious you will be rejected. When you visit the department in charge to submit documents, make sure to turn in anything that can tell time. And after moving in, application withdrawals will not be accepted for hallucinations, hearing voices or other health reasons. For security reasons, the unit at the end of each hallway is always empty, and if the lights are on or you hear a sound, to ignore it. The apartment doesn't have a fourth floor for religious reasons either. So if it stops, to just unalive yourself before you're discovered. Entering the stairwell at night is prohibited if you end up absolutely needing to use the stairs. Make sure you crawl. Jian asks him if he understands now. June says besides the note, why do they need to contact a pharmaceutical department? Asking if it's about human experiments. Jian says that's one interpretation at least. June asks him what the right answer is, and Jian asks what he means. June says that it's an odd document, so surely it has some kind of a conclusion, right? He looks down at Sunna and thinks for a moment. Then tells June that the thing about ghost stories is that they don't have endings or conclusions. He says the document was posted by someone for Clover, it's not like there's a real conclusion or anything. June says that means they just put a picture up, and Jian says yes. I really don't get what this conversation is about, bro is cooked. June apologizes, and realizes that Jian doesn't want to be misunderstood as not knowing something. Jian says to summarize, what's called a manual ghost story is just sneaking weird warnings into otherwise normal documents. June starts to think about the laughing woman. And says he can feel this is gonna be another pain in the ass. Outside of the third-year hallways, we hear a woman laughing as she walks by the rooms. She has a box cutter in hand, while smiling hella creepy like. I can fix her. Damim tells them that they'll call it here today, and to make sure they all have their textbooks with them. And to be sure to bring the right ones according to the schedule. As everyone goes to head home, June hears the students talking about the books, and starts to laugh. Saying from his 3 years of high school experience already, he can tell them. They won't even open their textbooks when they get home. Sunna then calls out to him, and tries to say something, but is nervous. He realizes what she's trying to say, and asks if she wants to walk together. She cheerfully says yes, and he asks if Jian has already left. She points over saying he's still here. He's talking to the guy who did nothing but play games. June thinks about something, then calls them the fat and skinny duo. Ornstein and Smo, if you know you know. The school bell officially rings to end the day, and we see June and Sunna walking together. He asks her if she goes left from the school gates. She tells him yes. He says he has to go right, so it's a shame they'll have to part. As they keep walking, he thinks about the understanding in the status window. While it doesn't show him levels or stats, it told him to just raise his understanding. He says since it's only 5 out of 100, maybe he can guess to try and raise it. He starts talking about how the apartment she lives in is over 30 years old, and it's usually full of elderly people. He says that gives him some clues. He starts saying she's broke in like 10 different ways. But nothing pops up about the understanding. He says it doesn't seem to work like this, and thinks his vocabulary is the problem. So again he calls her broke 10 different ways. She's catching stray after stray. He says he guesses it doesn't work like this after all. And then thinks it'll need to be more of a deeper deduction. He says that she acts slow and doesn't talk much. It's possible she was an introvert from the start, but it wouldn't be surprising if it was something environmental that caused it. He wonders if it's from her home environment. Maybe growing up poor made it hard to interact with others and slowly ate away at her self-esteem, and that's how she became timid now. His understanding of her jumps up by 30 points, and he is surprised that it actually worked. She calls out to him, as they've already reached the gate. The security guard scolds a girl for her shoes, and June recalls him being mobbed previously. They both say bye to one another, and as she goes he tells her to hold on, and he starts to think about the words to say. Then just apologizes to her. Since it's been 3 years for him since he's walked home like this, it's a bit nostalgic to him. He couldn't help but feel excited about it all, but unfortunately he was sleeping on one important fact. He goes to ring the door, but quickly realizes he has no clue which apartment they lived in. A lady starts to come out, and he says this is great timing. He quickly runs in the door before it closes, and makes his way back home. He opens the door, and then remembers his mother is a cashier. Even though he spent a lot of time with them over his 3 years, he still misses them greatly right now. There's no way they made it through the Demon King unharmed. He spots something on the table. It's some money and his mother saying to go buy something to eat. He looks happy while reading it, but asks where he can get chicken for that cheap here. He eats something out of the fridge, and says being home is an unbeatable feeling. He looks over and says that nothing happened, but he wasn't able to let his guard down at school. But at least here he can finally relax. He thinks of the Demon King, asking how he's meant to fight that. He lays down on the couch, saying it's a whole new arc for school, and even though he's done 3 years already, it feels like a whole new start. He lets out a sigh, and says it means he'll have to take the national exam again, and says damn. Later in the day he hears his door buzzing, and he quickly gets up out of bed, and runs out of his room to see his parents. They are surprised he's so excited, and ask what's gotten into him, asking if he saw a ghost or something. He quickly says that's not it, and his mother asks what he wants to get for dinner. He tells her whatever she wants, and she says he's definitely being odd. He looks back at his system window, and it says he's on his second attempt, and has 13 GS points, and a casualty rate of 2%. There's also some other stuff, but he will explain when it's important. He wonders why it says second attempt, since the first one was when his head popped, and the second was the Demon King. So this would be his third. But he decides to just skip the stuff he doesn't know. He still doesn't know what the GS points are for, or the casualty rate. The club thing is also still locked. He clicks on statistics and we see that it has all of the time he's spent doing things, along with his number of deaths. He asks if this was made by some kind of stalker, then he opens his settings tab, which is just like any other settings in a game. He is curious, and says he needs to do some experimenting. He says it's time to recap, he's doing it for us. He says from the settings the graphics adjust the brightness, contrast and gamma, so he can see better in the dark. It feels like a filter was put on his vision. The audio options made it seem like a pair of really good earplugs. But the control options were clunky, and it got to the point where when he moved his foot, his hand would move instead. He barely managed to reset it. His teacher Damim says that they'll pick their seats today, so to come up front and to draw lots. June draws 26, and walks over to it. He saw the girl beside him and his heart skipped a beat. She was way too pretty for him to even try talking to, never mind he wasn't that lucky. He's with Smo. He tells him that it's nice to meet him. Smo smiles and replies back. June recognizes him as Jian was hanging out with him. His name is Odu-kun, and June's understanding went up by 15. He asks about the handout from the other day. Even though Suna told him, he wants to get as much info as possible. He pushes up his glasses and snorts, asking if he means the laughing woman one. June wonders why he's such a weirdo, and gives him a look of disappointment. He tells him if he sees the laughing woman, not to pretend that he knows her. Then he says no good in Japanese. June regrets talking to him, saying he should go speak to Suna instead. He walks over at her, saying he saw she was late today. She says yeah, her grandma woke her up late. He asks if she's talked to her deskmate yet, and she says no. June decides to greet her, and introduces himself to her. She looks up at him, and he says that she's pretty, and really wishes he didn't have Smo as his deskmate. She introduces herself as in Haeun. June says that he's sorry for asking out of the blue, but asks if she recalls the handout, and how there was an odd warning. She says that it was certainly weird. If you spot a woman smiling strangely on campus to turn a blind eye until she passes by. She chuckles saying that's creepy, trying to see if he agrees. But he's just surprised she remembered it in such detail. He says that this ghost will probably happen, and wonders if he should go look for her. But the warning said not to pretend that he knows her, and shouldn't intentionally look for her. Suna's stomach rumbles loudly. Haeun looks at her, but so does June. She quickly starts to feel embarrassed. June says that he guesses she hasn't had breakfast yet. He tells her they'll go to the cafeteria during break. At the school convenience store, we see a box cutter. Inside the store we see there's a ton of people. June asks if they can even buy anything before the break ends. She says that she isn't sure. He tells her it's better to try than to not. He grabs something, asking what she'll be getting. She looks nervous, but before she can answer they turn around to see some students arguing about pushing people in. The guy says it isn't him, and turns around pissed, but when he looks up he sees a tall woman, who won't stop laughing. They wonder what her deal is, and say maybe she's crazy. She suddenly shouts no very loudly, and then slashes across his face very quickly, Bro got ahead of himself as his thoughts are sent across the room. The woman is still laughing even after murdering him. June looks over to see it, and both he and June's hearts sink. She covers her mouth out of pure shock. The other students all start to panic, and start running away from this. The woman continues to laugh, and starts to extend her box cutter. Then keeps her killing spree up, slicing them up very quickly, sending their heads flying across the store. June tells Sunna that it's definitely the girl. The girl from the handouts. I'm not sure if he got it from her laughing, or her slaughtering people. She starts decapitating students left and right. June grabs onto Sunna's hand and starts to run away with her. He tells her they need to get to the window behind the counter. He starts to recall what the printout said, and asks how the hell he is meant to ignore her, when she's killing indiscriminately. He helps Sunna across first, but she freezes up after seeing something, then points behind him yelling. He turns to see the woman is close, and she gets right into his face. Then goes straight for his eye, killing him. It says he'll restart from a previous checkpoint, and loads. He spawns back inside of the classroom, and says he better not be back to the entrance ceremony day. But looks up seeing the lights are on, and then pulls out his phone to check his YouTube notifications. He sees that it's just back to this morning. He wonders what made the checkpoint change, and recalls his death, and feels a phantom pain in his eye. He says that this is definitely no dream, and is reality. He says he needs to face the truth. He recalls what Smo said about ignoring her, and how Haeun told him to act casual by ignoring her. He lets out a long sigh, and asks how the hell he's meant to do that when she's killing everyone. Damim starts to go over their seating plans again, telling them to draw lots. He gets 26 yet again, and wonders if it's a coincidence. He looks over to see Smo, who is smiling at his phone. He still feels disgusted. He says he did his best to make a lot of variables during the entrance ceremony. For now he should just collect info. He sits down and starts talking to him, and asks about the handout again. He makes his way back to the dialogue with Haeun, saying it's creepy, and how he's silent, and then waits for Sunna's stomach to growl again. Before he asked her to go to the cafeteria, but there's not much to do there. So he plans to just not go and watch from afar. He says he can see the line well from here, and if he figures out from where she appears it'll be good. He spots her hand on the wall, and she slowly starts to climb over it while laughing. He's surprised she showed up so openly. Jian then asks him what he's doing here. We can see he just came out of the bathroom. He asks what he's looking at, and looks over at it. He tries to tell him to wait, but says that Jian knows more about the stories than he does. So surely asking him would be the right move. He asks Jian if he sees the woman. He adjusts his glasses, and starts describing her appearance. June says she's the smiling lady from the handouts, and asks how the character from the manual ghost story survived. Jian is confused, asking what he's talking about. June says that he mentioned it yesterday about the story, asking what the characters do. Jian says that there isn't a main character, asking if he doesn't understand it even though it's a simple concept. June gets pissed, and says he understands, but how did they live? He says that since it's a manual, shouldn't they just follow it? And that it tells him how to act and what not. He says that it's somewhat expected, and says it's the only way. Jian smacks his hand away saying that he's been acting odd since yesterday, asking if he's taking the handout seriously. He asks if it's because of the woman, saying she's just a crazy woman. Then they hear a visceral scream as they turn over to see the woman screaming at them. She's staring directly at Jian, and her box cutter flies in through the window, stabbing him in the head. June is surprised, as Jian just got killed so quickly. His body falls limp to the floor, and June starts to feel uneasy as his stomach twists into knots. The other students also see this, and start to scream loudly. Some other students wonder what's happening. They start to one by one come out into the hallway, and crowd around wondering what is happening. Sunna is one of them, but she's far in the back, before she can see anything. June grabs onto her hand, and tells her they should go take a walk in the field. She is caught off guard and a bit flustered. June says that Demon King or not, he doesn't care, he just wants to run away with Sunna. The screams can still be heard from outside. One of the students asks another if he heard that, but bro was locked into a podcast and says he had his earbuds in. The other student says there was a scream. Then we see June and Sunna running out of the school. He is holding onto her hand, determined to live. Sunna hears even more screams from behind. She tells June, but he tells her not to bother turning back. June is out of breath and says that it's the same thing from the store, or maybe even worse since they are in a hallway. The screams are drowned out by the woman's laughter, and she starts going to town on them. Head after head just sent flying, other students just watch in pure fear. June and Sana can even see it from outside. They keep running, and he wonders if they are doing this right. Asking if they can escape by running, but then what? He'll spend 3 years in another school, only to die by the Demon King to repeat this cycle. He says even if it isn't, he can think of something later. A cold chill is sent down his spine, as we hear the woman saying to not leave. June realizes she's talking to them. He starts to panic, saying they've been caught. But says it's okay, the gate is so close, and they definitely have enough time to climb the wall and hide. But he severely underestimated how fast she was, as she would smoke even Usain Bolt. Sana calls his name out but sounds distant, so he turns, thinking it's odd as she should be right behind him. But then he sees that he has just been holding onto her arm, as her body is on the floor with a laughing woman standing atop her. He falls to the floor, with his thoughts being drowned out by his heartbeat. He starts to beg for help. But it's too late, as she is already too close and cuts his head off. With his few seconds of consciousness left, all he can hear are her screams while being told he will be restarting again. He loads back into this morning, and is riddled with fear. He asks how the hell he can fight something like this. She's strong enough to cut people's limbs off with just a box cutter. She is faster than the world's fastest man too. He sighs, and says to calm down, there has to be a way out of this. He says the laughing woman is from the manual ghost story, just like how yesterday's announcement was resolved by staying in the classroom. The condition must be to pretend not to see her. But how can he do that when it's so terrifying? Even if he does it, those around him won't. Which will lead to there being another massacre. He says that the only solution is for him to be alone with her and to succeed. He talks about how it's driving him crazy, and he goes back to drawing lots again. He picks 26 just like usual. He says he's died a couple of times, but how can he get the same number 3 times in a row? But decides it's irrelevant. He says it won't be hard to be alone with her. She climbs over the wall during break, so he just needs to climb over first. The problem is pretending he cannot see her. He could close his eyes and block his ears. But that means he'd already have reacted. So he needs to endure it with his eyes open and without blocking his ears. He says there's no way to do that, bro forgot about settings. He starts to think about it, and wonders if he has to be the one to even do it. He says this ghost story is different from the entrance ceremony one. Since it's a real entity and not a mystery, it may be possible for others to stop her. Earlier he got caught since he ran across an open field. But he can survive if he runs or hides on his own. However, even if he reports it quickly, it won't save those in the store. So he decides that he could turn a blind eye to it just this once, and starts to think about the aftermath. Sana calls out to him, and blushes while trying to ask him if he would want to go to the store with her later, as she is a little hungry. He recalls her lifeless body from last time, and hides back the frustration from telling her no. He doesn't reply yet, and says if he knew about this he wouldn't have made friends. Even though he was meant to make them, so there's a way to clear it without anyone dying. But he's too phased to think about it. He determines himself to figure it out solo, and she calls out to him saying it's okay if he doesn't want to go. He sighs, and immediately folds, saying that he'll go with her. He says surely it'd be okay to go, right, and he can just take her to the store. Right outside of the cafeteria, June approaches the wall. Sana seems a bit nervous, and says the cafeteria is over to the side. He says yeah, but asks her to wait here for a second. He tells her he's gonna climb the fence for a bit, so he wants her to watch his back. She nervously looks to her left, and then to her right, and seems frightened for some reason. He asks her what's wrong, and realizes that he was distracted by the laughing woman, so it would look like he's trying to get her to cover while he smokes. He tells her it isn't like that, and that he has something important to take care of. He makes it over the wall, and says she should soon be climbing over the wall and head to the store. Unless she can teleport or something, she should be heading nearby. He says she's so tall it should be easy to spot. Then he does so, and sees her in the woods. She stops walking, then turns over staring at him. He says it's fine as he hasn't reacted yet. He wonders what to do, saying he hasn't figured out a way to deal with her yet. Unless he can blind himself, how can he ignore her? Then it clicks with him, the fact that he has the damn settings. He quickly puts his brightness to max, and can't see a damn thing. He says this is good. But it's not like he's looking away, he's just spacing away in front of her. He starts to hear her voice, and realizes that he needs to mute the audio. So he quickly swipes it down. He sighs, and says it's almost like he is meditating. And since he knows Suna has his back, his heart is very calm. But he is a bit uneasy since nothing is happening. He wonders if she went straight to the cafeteria, and goes to adjust his brightness a bit. But as he slides it down, she is right in his face. So he quickly maxes it out again. He hopes he didn't make a reaction. He wonders if she's doing this intentionally to force a reaction. He sighs, saying the status window is a power that she can't even change. He says that she is probably prowling around waiting to see a reaction, so he just needs to stay still. He says everything will be fine. He starts to think about all the shit she's put him through and says it pisses him off. Then smacks her in the face. The laughing woman is surprised. And he starts giving her the domestic violence no jutsu. Saying equal rights, equal lefts. He keeps hitting her, and says it's working. As she hasn't attacked back, it means that he hasn't violated the manual. He tells her to look at his face. She can surely tell he isn't looking at her. He's just a normal student who is practicing his shadow boxing. He hits her saying this one is for Suna, then gives her a left saying it's for Jian. Then he goes for a kick, saying this is for his grandpa. The laughing woman falls to the floor, but he doesn't know that and sits there out of breath, saying she was nothing but a chump. While being gassed out, he wonders how long he's been hitting her for. Asking if the break is over yet, but says that him being in one piece means he is definitely following the manual. He wonders how long he has to do it for, saying he should have gotten a message like before. Then he says maybe she actually ignored him and went to the cafeteria. And maybe Suna climbed over the wall to check on him. Then he starts to wonder if he's just been beating the hell out of Suna. He cuts it down a bit to check, but just sees the woman in his face. So slides it back, saying never mind, and that he almost pissed his pants. He clenches his fist, and hits her again, saying that he can freely swing his arms without having to worry. He keeps just hitting her over and over, and after a clean hit to her face he starts to wonder what this excitement he is feeling means. In this silent space all that exists are him and his fists. He wonders if sweating has ever felt this good before. And that he wants to do even more damage. He starts to channel his inner Ippo, and he hits her across the head. The laughing woman slowly starts fade out of existence. And goes poof from where he is standing. He is gassed out and asks if he got her or not. A message appears saying that he's come across and survived the B-rank ghost story, Laughing Woman, and has earned 15 GS points. And due to his wits of dealing with her, he earns another 70 GS points. He starts to feel excited, and screams very loudly. He hops back over the wall. He says that victory is more empty than he thought it would be. Suna calls out to him, and asks what he was swearing at, and that she heard fighting noises. He thinks she's talking about the laughing woman swearing. He starts to feel accomplished saying it was really one-sided. He tells her that there was someone crazy there, but he chased her away so it should be fine now. She says he should have called a teacher as it was dangerous. And asks if he's hurt or anything. He tells her he's fine. He says other than that, how many minutes left until their break ends? It cuts back to their classroom. Jian asks why they took so long to get back, saying class started almost 30 minutes ago. He says they are lucky that it's self-study time or else they would have thought that they'd be skipping classes on the second day of school. Jun says he had stuff to deal with, and then asks why it's self-study. It's meant to be Korean listed on the schedule. Jian says that they are busy with meetings and stuff since it's early. The teacher told them to think of a club to join. Jun asks about the clubs and Jian says clubs are pretty active in their school, so joining one is a must. Jun looks down at the schedule, saying that there aren't classes Friday afternoon. It's just club activities, and the school is hella serious about clubs. He starts to think about what clubs are available. His status window pops up, and says that he decided to make his own club. He says he hasn't even looked at them, but it decided for him that none of them appeal to him. He starts to think about it, but just sighs instead. He pulls out his pen and decides to go along with it and to do as he's been told. He puts an application in for the Ghost Story Club, finishing the tutorial. It cuts to the cafeteria, and we see their thing saying school lunch etiquette. He looks at the status window to show that club management is still locked, and his casualty rate is 4%. While munching, he says the casualty rate is higher, and wonders if it's an experience system. He skips the things he doesn't know, and opens his status windows. We see that he has 3 options for special abilities. He says he can use the ghost story points for a special ability. He says it wouldn't make sense to be fighting monsters without them. He clicks on the menu to reveal he needs 100 GS points to unlock the ability. He says those points he saved from dying over and over, he has to spend it all to get a single point. He says the economy in this game blows. He uses them all, and a window pops up and turns out it's a gacha system and begins to roll for his skill. As it starts to spin, he starts to feel sick that they are all random. He wonders what fast walking is, saying it's not even running. He starts to pray he gets something not straight dookie. It starts to slow down, and he says please anything but fast walking. It starts going from skill to skill very slowly, and lands on one called Goddess of Luck. It's an S-rank skill, that triggers automatically. It will give him a burst of luck in a dire situation. But it's a consumable which bothers him. He says things are looking good from the start. They head to McDoria, it's their version of McDonald's I guess. Jian is telling them all that burgers aren't bad for their health. He says it's perfect food, and well he yaps a lot. June ignores him and keeps eating. He keeps yapping, but quickly distorts as his voice is stuck on loop. Then he continues, asking June if he understood it all. June says yeah sure, and looks over at Sunna putting on makeup, and says she's really pretty. June keeps it up, and then his head starts to swell up, and he explodes like a zit, causing his glasses to fall through the air, and land on June's face. It was due to his Goddess of Luck. He says he didn't expect them to work like this. He looks over at Sunna saying they should get going. But he is surprised to see her stab herself in the eye. She pulls it out and repeats it over and over, leaving nothing but blood on their food. He calls out to her, and she slowly turns to him with half of her face destroyed. She starts to laugh like a banshee, and he jolts awake. He sits up in bed, and sighs out of relief it was just a dream. But he says it's understandable, as he's been through so much. He sighs again and looks drained emotionally. He says he hopes nothing special happens today. It cuts to the school, and inside of the bathroom we see a toilet. Some hands begin to crawl out of it, as we see a girl's face peer out of it. If you've watched till the end, comment, spaghetti, to let me know. Subscribe for more videos like this, leave a like or a comment to help the channel out. Thanks for watching.